Okay, so we're going to be talking about numbers and percentages. So we have these symbols. We should know what they mean. And we want to know what these symbols are, what their numbers represent. What does the symbol mean? How do we say the symbol? And these are symbols like saying percentage, billions, symbols like that. So let's have a look, especially when we are giving detail about the population of a place, maybe of your country, what percentage of people do something or speak a certain language. So these are the symbols that I'm talking about. So if we have a symbol like this means point. So for example, if you're saying, he won $6.5 million. So $6.5 million. Okay, so this symbol here is said as point. And that's an example, $6.5 million. This is a percent. Okay, so we have, the first one is 1 billion, 1.3 billion, 3.5 billion, 5.5 billion, 7 billion, 23%, 38%, and 51%. So we can see that a percent means out of 100, and the point is just, we use it with a number, which usually is when we talk about million or billion. Okay, so we're going to let's read an article together where we've got these symbols and practice our pronunciation. So we can read together. We're going to be reading an article. It's called The Face of 7 Billion People. Okay, so you can repeat after me. There are 7 billion people in the world. And there are 7,000 people in this photo. Each person in the photo is equal to 1 million people. That's 7 billion in total. Age. The average age of all the people in the world is 28. Population. 20% of the world's population live in China. There are 1.3 billion people in India. Language. 14% of the world's population speak Mandarin as their first language. 6% speak Spanish as their first language. 6% speak English as their first language. But English is a second language for 1 billion people. Religion. There are many different religions in the world. For example, 31% of the world are Christians. 23% are Muslim, and 15% are Hindu. Jobs. 40% of people work in a service industry. Hotels, banks, etc. 38% are in agriculture, and 22% are in manufacturing and production. City and countryside. 51% of the world's population live in cities, and 49% live in the countryside. Internet and mobile phones. 3.5 billion people in the world use the internet, and 5.5 billion people have a mobile phone. Okay, just some vocab. Average means like the usual, the typical, you know, what everyone is just an average. What's the average between the people. What do they mostly do? And is equal to means the same as. Okay, so we read the article. Let's answer some questions about it. I'll give you a moment to read it again. So when we have facts, it means that it's true information. So the article that we just read was all facts. It had all true information about the world, about where people live, the population of the world, the population of people that speak a language. So the word facts means true information. But an opinion is when we say what we think or what we believe or our thoughts or ideas. So everybody can have different thoughts and beliefs, but a fact is always a fact. It will always remain true. Everybody will agree on it, okay? We'll agree on whatever fact. But an opinion will change. Everybody will have a different opinion. So let's look at some everyday verbs. So we have live, speak, to have, to work, and to use. So we're just looking at 5 verbs in the present simple. So these are just very basic words. To live means where do you stay? You know, where is your home? Where do you live? Sleep and eat. Where do you live? Speak. So what do you speak? What language do you speak? Or you can say someone speaks politely, kindly. Have is a verb to show what we have. Like I have a phone, I have a mobile phone, a laptop. And to work means, you know, what do you do for a living? How do you make your money? What do you work? And to use means like I can get something and do something with it. So I use a mobile phone, or I use email for work. I use my laptop for my work. So let's have a look at some of these verbs. So 1.4 billion people live in China. 70% of the population speak the language of Mandarin Chinese. Over 1.3 billion Chinese people have a mobile phone. 25% of the population work in agriculture. 55% of the Chinese use the internet. Another interesting word is this word in. It's a preposition. So a preposition just means these small words like in, at, by. It's a small word that we use either to show location or to show, you know, place and location. So if you see this word in a country, in a city, in a region, in a type of work, or in a type of industry. So I can say, for example, if we look at number 6, 21 million people live in Mexico City. So we say in a city. So we live in Adelaide. There are 65 million people in the United Kingdom. So in a country in the United Kingdom. So number 2, it goes with saying in a country, to a. 40% of the population work in the service industry. So we say in a type of work. So I work in the teaching industry. Javiera works in the wine industry. Okay, so you could say Curly's father works in the computer industry, in the computer business. So when we talk about a job, we say in and then the job. 49% live in the countryside. So another word for country, countryside, we say in the country. So you could say, I went for a holiday in the country. Okay, I went for 2 weeks to stay in the country, or my parents live in the country. So let's write some of these sentences using in. So these are some examples. There are 20 million people in Colombia. In Brazil, the main sport is football. 3 million people live in Cali, Colombia. Brazil is the 7th most populated country in the world. My parents and my brother live in Colombia. 95% of people in Colombia have mobile phones. 10% of women in Colombia play soccer. Almost 40% of Venezuelan people live in Colombia. In Brazil, there are 200 million people. In Vietnam, there are 97 million people. 12.3 million people live in São Paulo, Brazil. Argentina is the 8th largest country in the world. There are 51 million people in Colombia. So you could see that when we talk about a country, a city, a place of work, we say in before those words. So you could see in Colombia, in Cali, in the world. There's no jobs. We could say, 30% of the population work in the teaching industry. So you could say a type of work. And remember, because we have been looking at talking about these symbols. So we want to say, 70% of people, 80% of people live somewhere, or they work in a type of job. Or if it's a number that is above, like in the million, then we say point. 1.2 billion people, whatever, 1.3 billion people. Okay, or million. Remember, not just, we use this when we talk about million, but also billion. So any numbers that are in the million, 1.1 million, 2.2 million, whatever number, we say point and then percent. So how many? Number 9. How many people are in your country, in your town or city, in your English class, in your family, in your school, in your work? So here are just some sentences. Let's have a look. Make sure you can see those sentences with the word in. So as some example, 50.7% of the Colombian population are female, while 49% are males. There are 7 million people living in the capital, Bogota. 10% of Colombians are unemployed. 57% of Colombians are Catholic. There are around 4 million tourists every year. Okay, so that was about Colombia. Peru. In Peru, there are 32 million people, and 29 of them live in the capital city, Lima. 10% of people work in the mining sector. There are 17 million people living in Ecuador. For every kilometer, there are 69 people. 80% speak Spanish, while 20% speak a native language. 30% of people work in agriculture. Okay, and that was for Ecuador. So you could see that we are giving information about your country, about what's the percent of people that speak a certain language, what's their job, what percent of people work in a job. So if you look at this one in Japan, let's read Japan. So there are 37 million residents in Tokyo. So residents mean people that live there. So there are 37 million people living in Tokyo. Japan is the most populous city in the world. 189.4 million people live in Brazil. More than 50% of them live in the cities. Most families work in the manufacturing industry. This is from South Korea. I'm from South Korea, but I live in Australia now. I have 6 people in my family, except for my father, who has passed away. Now I live in Adelaide, which is a beautiful city. Okay, so this one was a little different, but if we look before about talking about Colombia, we can see how we use the word in and also percent and the point. So 50.7%. Okay, so really important. What did we learn? We learned how to say these numbers, you know, the billion, the million, to say the point. We also learned how to say the percentage, 23%, 38%. We know how to talk about a country and what's its population, how much of the people speak a certain language, how much of the people work in a certain industry, in a certain workplace. And we know the difference between a fact, which is true information, and when you give an opinion. Opinion is just what you think. Everybody thinks something different, but a fact is true information. So for example, Australia has, I think, about 25 million people. That's a fact. It's true information. Okay, so that's what we learned.